I'm
Okay.
Rob Licuria, senior editor at God Derby, here with Bill Nye, star of Living. Bill, the screenplay for Living was adapted by acclaimed novelist Kazuo Ishiguro. I mean, he is so good at writing nuanced, seductive, perceptive stories about longing and passion under the surface. So, what were your thoughts when you started actually, being part of this film and speaking the words written by someone like him?
Well, I mean, I've been very, very fortunate in my life, and beyond lucky. But this was a marvelous development and completely unexpected. I didn't know Kazuo Ishiguro at all. I went to dinner with the producer Stephen Woolley, and he was there. And I think the dinner party was what triggered his idea. He'd long harbored the desire to reimagine the Kurosawa movie, and he wanted to marry it with a kind of Englishness, what's called Englishness, but I'm sure there are characters like that all over the world. And then somehow or other he put that all together with me, and I don't quite understand why or what that connection was. And it's got too late to ask him. I don't know how. I can't answer. You know what I mean? It'd be embarrassing. So, but and then in the script, and he didn't want to write the script. He was just making the suggestion. And then Stephen Woody persuaded him. He said, "Well, why don't you write one? And if it's lousy, we'll get somebody else," which was quite a cute way of getting him to do it. So, and he did it. And of course, it wasn't anything near lousy. It was completely brilliant. So I was very honored by it. I was, none of it escapes me. I felt very, very, very fortunate.
Yeah, I can imagine having someone like that write the screenplay for you, a character just for you. What do you think it was about that encounter with him and about you? We all know you in the public eye. What do you think it was about you that made him think that you'd be good at or good for this kind of remaking from the English perspective of, the acclaimed Japanese film?
I don't know, honestly. I wish and I've never asked him, and I think he presumes that I do know. I
Yeah,
think I think he thinks I know or something, but and he's never really. He just sort of says it as if, oh well, of course you'd understand, which I don't. I mean, I know he saw me in another film called Their Finest, which was also produced by Stephen Woody, and I know that, and that's of the same period, but it's not the same kind of character.
no.
So I don't know. I mean, I think people do. I am, as far as I know, because I don't read anything about myself and I don't get out much and I don't watch the movies, but I know that I am associated with a kind of Englishness. I mean, people say that stuff to me, like you are, you know, I know I've been described as the quintessential Englishman. Where that comes from, I have no idea. You know what I mean? I'm not that guy. I'm not, it can only be from roles that I've played.
Yeah.
So maybe that's part of maybe that was part of the reason. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, many of us know you obviously from Love Actually, and then your career you've been working for decades. In fact, I think back to your time on Love Actually and how you won a BAFTA for that. You weren't nominated at the Oscars. I'm still getting over that. I just feel like that is the most ridiculous snub ever. But how do you feel about people still talking about a film that came out 20 years ago that many people believe it's, the quintessential Christmas classic, and you have a huge part to play in that, don't you?
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I feel good about it. I've always felt very, very, I feel nothing but good and grateful and happy to be associated with the film. And it changed my life. It changed the way I went to work. It meant I never had to audition again, which you ask any actor on the planet, for their number one wish. Please let me not have to audition anymore. And it did me an enormous amount of good, professionally. And also it's a beautiful the whole thing. I mean, Richard Curtis is a believer. He's not making romantic or films to manipulate money out of people. He's making because he believes in this, in love, and he believes in human beings, and he believes that we can be tender and compassionate and courageous and care for one another. And there's plenty of other films about heroin and suicide for those those boys in dark clothes.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about Oliver Hermanus's beautiful film. I just found it so beautiful to look at, listen to, kind of felt very immersive as it opens. It made me think that a film where a man is being faced by his imminent death and then kind of wakes up with not a lot of time to go should feel like a cautionary tale or tragic or a tragedy, but it's not. It's not that at all. Why do you think the film is not as dour as perhaps maybe the subject matter might lead you to believe?
Well, I don't really understand. I do know that tragedy, for instance, is supposed. The reason that people wrote tragedies, the reason that people like them, for instance, in the theatre, is because they are finally uplifting. I don't quite. I mean, partly it's because the terrible things are not happening to you; they're happening to somebody else. But it's more than that, I think. I mean, if you're talking about great work like King Lear, people go to see King Lear to be uplifted, not to be depressed about. It's one of the saddest stories ever told. But the effect at the end, when you know, is a hopeful one, is an uplifting one. And similarly with this, I mean, you know I'm in a hit because it's been out in England for a while now, and my phone has been on fire with messages from people I haven't heard from for 25 years. You know that somebody phoning up saying I can't get into the cinema. This, my heart goes boom. These are this is what you want to hear. And this is a film, as you say, about a guy who gets a disastrous. Nobody's carrying a gun. Nobody takes their top off. I offered to take my top off, but they put it back on. And and they all say the same thing, which is that they feel galvanized by it, they're inspired by it, they come out the cinema and they want to get things done, they want to do that thing they were putting off forever, they want to, so, and who knows whether that'll probably last into the middle of the week, who knows, but it's good for 2 or 3 days, and some things may get done, but it's not, as you say, it's an uplifting, and it's the cleverness of the mechanism. It's beautifully as with the original film, it's beautifully constructed in order to deliver that.
That's right. I mean, it's set such a long time ago, but when you have Mr. Williams in that day-to-day interminable monotony, surrounded by piles of paper, where his colleague, Miss Harris, Amy Lee Wood, who plays her, warns him that without all that paper, people suspect that you have nothing important to do. I saw a lot of that in myself, and I think a lot of people do. Because that's so important to make sure that you've got this facade of being a hard worker and diligent and so forth. But who cares about that? That's what this film, I think, is trying to tell me, and I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely correct. Yeah, I mean, I think people really do identify with it, and in more ways than one, and including myself. I mean, I don't have a job where I have to go to the same place every day, but I have a job. I have many jobs, and I have to be conscientious, and I have to turn up, and I have to, and I've been doing it for a very long time, so, and I'm also, and in terms of other areas of my life, I procrastinate, like as good as anyone. I'm as good as anyone. Don't worry, I can put off anything you got. I will die, and there will be a long list of things I never quite got around to. You know what I mean? There'll be everything from that light fixture to the novel. It's there'll be a lot of stuff.
It's so refreshing to hear people tell you that, isn't it, in day-to-day life? Because I feel like, am I the only one that has a super long list of shit that I have to do, and I just can't quite get there? Because there's always something else that I'd rather be doing. But yes, I agree. And that's a lot of that is this film. And that made me feel actually really, I kind of really related to him. And I shouldn't kind of had to have, because he's from a long time ago and he's English. But I think the universality of what Kazuo and Oliver are trying to achieve here really comes through in the film. And that's what I found to be most relevant. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do absolutely agree. And I have to say, how lucky can you get? Oliver Hermanus, Kazuo Ishiguro, Helen Scott, the designer, Sandy Powell, the designer, Jamie Ramsey, the genius cinematographer, Stephen Woolley, one of the great English film producers of all time. What an outfit, what a team to deliver this particular suggestion. It's great. Yeah. And I'm very, very happy about that.
Absolutely. And I highly recommend Emily Levinez Farouche's score. Put that on your headphones. It's absolutely divine. So beautiful. So this is the super obvious question, because you're currently doing media, right? So I can imagine everyone wants to ask you, what would you do in your last days? I don't really want to go there. I'd rather be thinking more about you're playing someone facing the final moments or months of his life. That leads you to look within and have some reflection on your own life. And so, how much personal introspection does an actor have to do, generally speaking, when he has to play someone who is facing the last moments of his life?
Um, in my case, no more than I would normally be involved with. I mean, I don't think that it actually. Let me think. I'm trying to be honest. I mean, I'm not that I'm ever not trying to be honest, but I'm trying to be accurate. I don't think, I don't think my performance in the film does not rely upon a personal whatever I think about dying. It's not required. It's like personal experience is very overrated in terms of acting. It's like you don't have to you don't have to be bereaved. You're not acting. Most of what, anyway, I speak personally. My performance is based on observing other people. It's like if you don't have to be bereaved to act bereaved. You don't have to be, it's like, but you've observed people who are bereaved, or not, whatever. You just have to do it as use your imagination. It's like you can't, if you have to be inebriated or intoxicated, you can't report back from a personal state of inebriation. So you have to rely on your observations of other people. So, and similarly with this, I don't have to go inward. I mean, I suppose I do go inward, but I'm not really self-aware. So I don't really, it's not fancy or anything. I just try and imagine what that guy might. And what's good about this part is that he doesn't allow himself to express much anyway, because not in any expansive way, because those were the times when you weren't allowed to do that. And he was in the tradition of repression and suppression. So that's kind of fun. Yeah. That's kind of fun to act,
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Like you
have to express quite a lot with very little. And that gets to be kind of, it's delicious. It's sort of exciting.
Well, yeah, that leads me to this. Like I have to admit, one of my favorite performances of yours, and I don't know how you're going to think of this, is as Victor in Underworld, because it's so arch and so over the top, and it's just so beautiful to watch. This is like the complete reverse, because there's so much of it is repressed, it's inside. What's actually more difficult, or are they both as difficult as each other to go all out, or to really leave a lot for just nuance and facial features and so forth?
It's hard to say, and there's not much in it. I would think if I had a gun at my head, I'd say living is harder. Playing a character because it's quite in its way. Well, when I do it, it needn't be, but the way that I do it, it's quite physical, because you have to hold yourself still and tight, and and you have to squeeze out the voice, and you're forever uptight. That's quite exhausting.
Yeah.
I remember John Boorman. I'm not comparing myself to Lee Marvin, and I'm not comparing myself to, but I remember him saying to me once when I was a young actor and I auditioned for John Boorman a couple of times. I never got the job, and I don't hold it against him because he was a very nice person. And he told me that on Point Blank, do you know the Lee Marvin movie?
Yeah.
Which he said that Lee Marvin he'd do a shot with Lee Marvin where he'd just have to be standing somewhere looking round a corner or something. And then he would shoot him for a couple of minutes. And then when he finished, Lee Marvin would be completely exhausted and would have to sit down or something, because he'd put so much, the suggestion was he'd put so much into that action that he was sort of drained by it, which I always remembered. Anyway, there's an element of that. I'm not comparing myself to Lee Marvin, but there's an element of that in having to act this kind of character where you have to be so contained all of the time and super self-conscious about every little movement of your face over the It's quite.
That's right. yeah, that fragility and vulnerability that bubbles underneath him, I would imagine would be difficult to calibrate from scene to scene. Does that mean that you just have to, by necessity, have that kind of relationship with the director? So Oliver is helping you calibrate and turn it up and turn it down. Is that how it works?
Yeah, he really did help. And he was very good. And he was very good on the voice, because I had one line, which was in fact the first line that I spoke in the whole movie. And that was the key to the voice. That was and he would say, and every time we started a new scene or even a new take, he would say, do you want to do that? Do you want to do the trigger line? You want to just to key it in, for the voice, because sometimes the voice would wander a little bit. So it worked, and he's very good. That's what directors are good at, hopefully, is because they have the whole picture in their head, and is calibrating it in the way you suggest.
Absolutely. Bill, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you on, hopefully, on the Oscars red carpet. I have everything crossed.
Oh, well, thank you.